Today I'm going to detail those and why I no longer follow the carnivore diet.
You know, the more I think about it, the more I think that the carnivore diet is like a cult.
But when I look back at when I was doing keto for about a decade, even the times when I was very, very strict, there are some things that I would definitely do differently now, having a broader amount of knowledge.
The end of that story, or the next chapter of the story, was about 2 years into the carnivore diet. I started noticing persistence of unpleasant symptoms.
So, who knows? I don't know. And I'm not saying that carnivore did this, but I'm saying that I've been on carnivore. I'm a pretty darn healthy person. I work out like 5 mornings a week. I'm pretty healthy, have a decent weight. I don't smoke. I don't drink. Haven't had a drink in 23 years. I don't do drugs. There should be no reason, I would think, that I would have a stroke.
Is everyone quitting keto and carnivore in 2024? Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional information online. In this video from Goji Man, I've reviewed Goji Man before. He's pretty fun to listen to, but he has a bias toward plant-based eating, which we'll see here, but he has some really interesting interviews of people who were influencers in keto and carnivore, and they've changed their minds. So let's see what Goji Man and these influencers have to say. Before we dive into today's video, I want to invite you to my free webinar, Beyond Cholesterol, the 2 biggest risk factors for cardiovascular disease. If you're confused by cholesterol or feeling pressured by your doctor to take cholesterol medication, this webinar is perfect for you. Discover the crucial facts about why cholesterol isn't the primary concern for cardiovascular disease risk, and learn what you should focus on instead to evaluate and lower your risk. You can sign up below.
Why are so many of these people quitting keto and carnivore? Let's explore.
Well, wait a sec. So this is my second time through the video, and we're going to hear Goji Man criticize other people for making money on the videos, and now he's selling the products to, well, in fact, the products that he's selling have to do with digestive issues. And in fact, the digestive issues go away pretty much on the keto diet the way I teach it. So it's very interesting, not coincidental, that he's selling products to help you figure out what's going on with your gut to an audience that has a lot of plant-based diet eaters. So, but that's interesting. That he's going to criticize and say, don't listen to people who make money from carnivore.
Now, it's clear that many people fall into the keto and carnivore diets usually to resolve health problems. It could be gut issues, autoimmune issues, or even diabetes. But the problem with many of these people is that they add 1 and 1 and they get 35. They have underlying health issues, and instead of fixing these health issues at the root cause, they get brainwashed into thinking that all fruits and vegetables are bad for them.
And to make things worse, like many people, I started getting swayed by all of this stuff, namely things like the natural defense chemicals in food, like plants want to kill you. Things like oxalates, lectin, phytic acid, all of these anti-nutrients found in plants. When you eat them, they're now like fighting against your body.
Now, if I said to people, I can make you rich within 24 hours, you just need to give me £1,000, then most people would rightly say you're a scammer. But for some reason, when influencers come to the internet and say that fruits and vegetables are toxic, and if you remove them from your diet, then all of your health issues go away, then people will drink this nonsense up for one very simple reason. Quite simply, when your health is failing you, you are more vulnerable and you are more prone to making irrational decisions.
Well, so I don't fully agree with this statement. So actually, I've reversed an individual's diabetes in 2 days because he was drinking Coca-Cola and using insulin to manage the drinking of Coca-Cola. So there can be miraculous results that happen pretty quickly in certain circumstances. And in my experience, if someone has a lot of inflammation, they may even have autoimmune issues, but definitely diabetes and obesity, the reduction in hunger and weight loss actually does occur really fast. I used to say, it got picked up by other folks, that what I see is so unbelievable, you won't believe it. And you're going to hear that in this video, that if it seems too good to be true, it can't be true. Well, no, come to my clinic and you'll see. And what's fascinating is we're just telling you information. Is that selling something? I mean, a lot of influencers end up selling things, but that's not the main reason they're there. They're there to give you information, and you can choose to buy what they're selling or not. You still get the information.
But the thing about truth is that it will always come through. You might see some initial health improvements by going keto or carnivore, but sooner or later you will see the consequences.
So I don't know the consequences of diabetes reversal for 20 years. So anyway, he's giving a very biased, even fear-mongering view because he just doesn't know.
The end of that story, or the next chapter of the story, was about 2 years into the carnivore diet. I started noticing persistence of unpleasant symptoms. So testosterone dropped to around 500 total, sleep disturbances, palpitations, muscle cramps when I was surfing or climbing. And I started to think, okay, maybe long-term ketosis is not great for me.
Now you might look at it and say, what's the harm going keto or carnivore? You might get some sleep issues, muscle cramps, or even palpitations. Well, for many, it can be much worse.
But I just had a stroke down in the basement. I was doing my arm weights on a bench, on an incline bench, and I was pushing my arm up in the air. I had just 15 pounds, which is not heavy. And unfortunately, my left arm started going numb, and then my left leg went numb. I immediately knew it was a stroke, and I ran upstairs, and I said, Alan, get out of bed. I'm having a stroke. I'm having a stroke. Call 911. But I knew I needed to get upstairs because Alan would have been asleep if I passed out in the basement. And I knew something was quite seriously wrong with me. I'm a girl who, at 65 years old, had a stroke, and I'm going to have my cholesterol taken. I'm pretty concerned, actually, that I've been on carnivore on and off for a long time. I don't remember exactly when I started.
Now, I have made a few videos about the shocking rise in self-reported strokes and heart attacks in the keto and carnivore communities, but none of the cult leaders like Sean Baker want to acknowledge the situation because it's not good for business.
Well, so just think for a minute. Has anyone had a stroke by following a typical American diet? I mean, there are thousands and thousands. Has anyone had a stroke on a vegan diet or plant-based diet? Sure they have. So the idea of not making too much of one event is that you don't know the denominator of all the people who are doing something. How common is it? And you don't know the comparator. You don't know, is it different than any other kind of diet? And to say that this is from the carnivore diet is a bit of a stretch, although temporally related. There was someone years ago who had a top 10 things that keto diets or low carb diets cause at the time. The number one was car accidents, because, car accidents happen when people do carnivore. So carnivore causes bad things happen. I don't think any doctor using low carb keto diets is going to say you're never going to have a health issue. We can reverse things and prevent things, and some things still happen. There was a patient who came to me after a meeting off campus and said, do you know this doctor, this preventive cardiologist? I said, sure, I do. She said, I went to that preventive cardiologist for decades, and he checked me over and checked my blood, the cholesterol level, and then I had a heart attack. And from the preventive cardiology world, they don't have the tools to prevent heart attacks in everyone. So she was seeing a preventive cardiologist, assuming that what that meant is that she wasn't going to get a heart attack, when in fact they never really measured anything beyond an EKG. So anyway, it's unfortunate that people get sick, and to over dramatize one diet causing an illness, I think is kind of sad, but that's the way the world works today.
But this denial-like mentality goes right across the keto and carnivore communities.
And then I started to dig a little bit deeper and do some actual research into these topics. And much of what I found was conflicting and in many cases, not even true. And when I told my carnivore diet friends this, they would get all defensive. And they would start to bring up all the doctors that completely swore by it. They would say things like, well, how do you explain all of these people's health conditions that are completely disappearing? And then they start to dismiss my concerns by saying stuff like, you need to do more research. You need to look into Dr. Ken Berry and Dr. Anthony Chafee and Nutrition by Judy. And all because I was finding things that was going against what the carnivore diet people were saying. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't right, so I dug deeper. Because as it turns out, I was on to something. Because all these figures and people pushing the diet, which we're gonna start calling the usual suspects because they come up so often, they were only telling one part of the story. The part of the story that was convenient for them.
But the good thing is, for most sensible people, they don't want to live in echo chambers if their health is not improving, or they just know that what they are being told isn't stacking up.
I began to also follow along the way, along those months, during those months' time, I started following other influencers.
So I'm going to pause right there. I see that all the time. And now it's very interesting, the fear, inserting the fear about the cholesterol level when cholesterol looks different under low carb circumstances, the fear of some chemical that has no relationship really just to heart failure or to, so it's interesting that I never really knew what prejudice was, prejudging an approach, until I was in this world. And prejudice means you can have data to refute it, and yet people won't listen to it. Much like the fellow was saying that the carnivore followers were not listening to data. Well, it depends what the data are, how solid they are, and an anecdote here and there is not a big deal. Even, kind of looking at the particles in the blood when the entire organism is much better off can distract you from the big picture. If you're feeling well, don't get fear-mongered by, I hear this all the time. I was doing great and I went to my doctor and they said I shouldn't do that, and someone recently regained 50 pounds that he had lost because the doctor said don't do that. I looked over the information and I said, no, you can do this. So let me know in the comments if you've ever been told by a doctor that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing even though you're feeling great.
Influencers that aren't necessarily on the keto carnivore side. So I opened my mind up a little bit and I started to venture out and listen to what other experts had to say. Experts such as Dr. Lane Norton, who I credit with having changed my mind about the carnivore diet. So I thank you very much, Dr. Norton, if you happen to be watching this video. Anyway, after watching many of Dr. Norton's videos, I came to the conclusion that, gosh, maybe this isn't so great after all. Maybe I should just try counting my calories.
Now, if you have unfortunately found your way into the carnivore and keto diets, then please take a step back and take a pragmatic look at the improvements that you think you are seeing. Are the improvements that you are seeing because you are only eating meat, or could it possibly be you have removed processed refined foods from your diet?
Well, what was the old saying? Duh. A lot of diets can be healthy because you're not eating ultra-processed foods. So I don't know what his point was there. If you're not eating ultra-processed foods and eating carnivore, you can be healthy. He's, again, trying to say to you that it's not that the food's healthy, it's just that you're not eating the junk foods. So why don't you become plant-based? I mean, inserting some sort of doubt. Very interesting strategies to persuade being used here.
And my mental energy started to suffer, let alone my physical energy. That really started to fade away. The first little bit, things were okay. And even after a little bit, I started trying to manage my electrolytes and stuff like that, but it never really made it better. I knew something was up and I really started to think, were plant-based foods really that bad for me? And did I really need to be eating this way? And then my gym performance went and my bowel movements changed, and not for the better. And I really started to wonder, was I seeing improvements and feeling a little bit better in spite of what I was doing and not because of it? Instead of it actually being the absence of plants, was it because I was no longer eating so much junk and drinking alcohol?
Well, so always consider the source and what the influencer is using the diet to accomplish. Are you noticing a theme here that these are very high level athletes or in the gym, and most people who come to my clinic, they can barely walk. So please, if you're one of my patients and you're hearing these people not following an approach because of some, I don't know, it's not a serious medical issue, and you're reversing your diabetes, your high blood pressure, all of these things, remember that they're trying to really push the limit of their bodies, and maybe they're not getting enough salt. Steve Finney, one of my teachers, always said you need about 5 to 7 grams of sodium per day once you're keto adapted. And so people learn how to do that, especially if you're high functioning, high exercise kind of person. But so always consider the source of why someone has been using the diet. And these folks, it looks like it wasn't the right fit for their very active lifestyle. You might be surprised, in my book, End Your Carb Confusion, there are 3 different carb levels. It's not all keto. And I think you can match your carb level, whether it's plant-based or animal-based, based on your metabolism. Although I do start just about everyone at the lowest carb level, so you can experience what that feels like. And most people come to me for diabetes reversal, high blood pressure reversal, obesity treatment. It's a clinical kind of setting, not a gym setting.
Now, the next point that we need to cover off is, are a lot of these carnivore and keto influencers deliberately misleading people for their own financial gains? Of course, there are many who make videos that they know will gain more views and therefore generate more money. Obviously, controversy sells. Unfortunately, humans love the path of least resistance. Tell people that they can fix all of their health problems in 3 weeks, eating only meat, and people will jump on it because it appears easy.
Well, it's worth a try if you've tried everything else.
Nobody wants to hear the true reality though. Whether you are losing weight, building a business, or regaining your health, there are no quick fixes in life. We all know this, and it's why the saying, if it's too good to be true, then it probably is, was invented. But I think there is a wider issue with influencers on the internet. It is just they do not have the education to understand the implications of the advice that they are giving. Just listen to Thomas DeLauer here.
This one is going to irritate some people and probably confuse some people, but number 4 is I would have controlled my saturated fat intake more. Hear me out on this. We know now, well, we did know then, but we were in kind of an echo chamber. If you look at a lot of the literature, saturated fat in abundance, in an over-caloric state, is definitely a contributor to insulin resistance as well.
So I disagree, but it depends on the context. So I've reviewed some of Tom's videos before. If you haven't seen them, go back and look at my reacts. It depends on the context, what conditions studied. So if you're going to be, like you said, hypercaloric and eating carbohydrates, then saturated fat seems to be a problem. And this is where, in the short version, it's called comparing apples to oranges. It isn't the same context. So in a low-carb context, when you're burning fat really well, actually the fat levels in the blood go down even though you're eating more saturated fat. So I don't agree that saturated fat in the context of a low-carb diet is causing insulin resistance, because what I see is resolution of insulin resistance on a low-carb diet when people are eating high levels of saturated fat. So I'm sorry that he's still perseverating on that. There are a lot of people who are in the old paradigm, the new paradigm, and I'm in both, but I'm more in the new paradigm where we talk metabolic syndrome. We don't worry about saturated fat and cholesterol in the food. I have observed that if an influencer gets to a certain level and they don't have grounding in clinical trials or in medical research, they often kind of flip and flit in the wind, flap in the breeze, going back and forth, because the establishment will come and say, well, hey, wait a minute, look at all these studies on saturated fat. And they don't have the ability to say, yes, but that's in the context of high carb diets. I'm able to say that. But also the clinical credibility that Goji Man, you can come to my clinic I'll figure out a way, and you can see it in action. That's what's missing with a lot of influencers. They don't have the street credibility. I highly value doctor influencers who are seeing patients in real time because they're, walking the talk in their clinic. I don't care if they necessarily do it themselves. That's like asking the doctor, have you had appendicitis? Are you going to take out my appendix even if you haven't had appendicitis? No, you can be trained how to teach people to do things without actually eating that way.
It's not just sugar, and it's not just saturated fat, but when you look at them individually in high amounts, they can cause a fatty liver. They can cause insulin resistance.
Again, no, the saturated fat is not a problem in the context of the low-carb diet.
So here we have influencers advising people on diets, knowing the problems that they cause, because they don't want to communicate this because it's bad for business, because they haven't done the research in the first place, because they are caught in echo chambers, or because all of the above. Again, just listen to what Thomas is saying here about the basics of nutrition.
The third thing that I would have done differently is, depending on what I was eating, I would have added a multivitamin into my diet. Because I realized that if I reverse engineer and look at the way my diet was a lot of times on keto, there was no way I was getting adequate nutrition in. I was just not. I would eat things like chicken breast, and then I would also add cheese to it. I would do heavy cream, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, there's not any colors to this. I wasn't, some days, not getting a lot of red meat. Point is that on the days that I wouldn't be getting maybe liver in or red meat in, I should have been probably adding a good multivitamin in.
Well, I don't understand. Again, we're not, I don't think, designed to have a certain flow of nutrient every day. There were times evolutionarily where we probably didn't eat for a while. And yet with the commodity of food today and the availability of vitamins, it seems reasonable. Why not take a multivitamin? But don't just call out a diet like this, because all diets that are extreme, including vegan diets, have a problem. They have to take vitamin B12 in some sort of form, because that's the vulnerability there. So again, the multivitamin is something that I recommend in a weight loss program, just because people are eating less than before. That's an interesting idea. Do you have to have one? I don't know. And I would argue that he calls this nutritionally deficient, which I'm not sure a low-carb, keto, and even carnivore diet is. There are a couple of scholarly papers that look at the nutrition, and it looks pretty good.
He didn't even know at the time, or couldn't even be bothered to look, that the diet he was following was nutritionally inadequate, despite influencing millions to follow his approach. Now, time and time again, we are hearing more and more influencers who fail on these diets say shocking things like, when I started to do more research, I knew the importance of X, Y, and Z.
Well, so let's think about this a little bit. If Paul Saladino and Tom DeLauer, I don't know who the other gentleman was, are shading what they're doing, they're eating a little honey or a little more vegetables, but still eating a lot of meat, or worrying about saturated fat a little bit. It's not like they went plant-based. So I don't, it's okay, so they didn't hold to a way of eating like a cult. They changed a little bit, but I don't see any of them switching over to a plant-based diet, because that has its own nutritional issues. So to say that they're wavering a little bit still on the camp of animal-based eating, to me, is not very persuasive.
Just listen to Paul Saladino here.
I was definitely in ketosis at the time, monitoring the blood ketones at the meter, not deep ketosis, but definitely ketosis. And so at that point, I started to dig into the research a little bit more and understood that insulin signaling is critical at the level of the kidney to hold on to minerals, to hold on to potassium, calcium, sodium, chloride, magnesium, and that in long-term ketosis in most humans, you're going to become so electrolyte depleted that it's almost impossible to resolve that with enormous amounts of electrolyte.
I don't know why he's saying that, honestly. So, but in his particular situation, I did a video on Dr. Saladino when he changed. I think he finally found out that given his lifestyle, he felt better on more carbs. he didn't need a keto diet to reverse metabolic issues or diabetes. So some of the influencers have gotten into this thinking that they found the holy grail when actually they do better functionally adding a little more carbs and not being in ketosis all the time or even any of the time. That's great. That doesn't mean that keto is not good for other people. So you have an individual experience and you can actually modify what you do and see how you feel. The feeling that Goji Man is trying to give you is to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which I'm not ready to do.
It's shocking that you get these idiots come to the internet with very little understanding of nutrition and convince millions of people to follow their advice.
Well, I'm not sure I'd call them idiots. That's a bit extreme.
And then 6 or 12 months later, they flip-flop to something else they've read on the internet and have no understanding of. This guy sums it up very well.
They're just demonizing food. Like, Paul Saladino. I know that he's not considered fully carnivore by the real carnivore people because he eats fruit and honey. But, Paul Saladino, he goes into grocery stores and, makes fun of people for eating vegetables and wears these stupid shirts, kale is bullshit and that kind of stuff. And, making people feel guilty about eating vegetables and going in there with no shirt. Who goes into a grocery store with no shirt and shoes?
Well, so that's called an ad hominem attack. So if you can't debate somebody on the topic at hand, you just say that, call them names.
So, the more I see stuff like that, the more I think this is like a cult.
So true, but the final point that I want to make here is if you are someone who has health issues, please look at the person you are getting advice from on the internet and look at how inconsistent their messaging is. Ask yourself, what are their motives for giving you that advice? Because if money is involved, there is a good chance your health is not even a passing thought for that influencer. It's just another payday. Ask yourself the simple question of whether it's too good to be true. You can't become rich overnight, you can't lose 60 pounds healthily by taking weight loss injections, and you certainly can't fix underlying health issues on fad keto or carnivore diets.
I totally disagree. He just doesn't know, or he gets money from telling people that. Very interesting switch there. Well, so actually in an obesity medicine clinic that I'm in and there are 5,000 obesity medicine doctors, we actually do help people lose weight in a healthy manner using shots and pills and very low calorie diets. Some people even need surgery for weight loss, although that's not my area. I'm not a surgeon. So this is an influencer who's trying to get you to undo the progress that you've made because they are a cult. The plant-based folks, actually, many of them from religious or ethical reasons, they are trying to convince you not to eat meat and have to be transparent about that. I mean, as a health coach, as a doctor talking about nutrition, I don't try to get people to eat a certain type of food. I try to get them to understand how that food impacts their health. And low carb and keto kind of separates itself out as not being cultish. Like we're not trying to go and be a missionary to change the way everyone eats. Focus on how you do. Of course, I do recommend as a grassroots change that if you're having benefits that you tell your friends and family about it, and some people do have missionary zeal because of their health benefits to be on YouTube and to be on Instagram and show the results. I don't think that's necessarily being a cult, but some people do have that kind of zeal. I recommend that you just lead by example and don't push other people too hard, because usually they'll follow your example. Well, a lot of interesting attempts at persuasion, and I didn't really get presented with anything, other than the woman who had a stroke. That's serious, and yet strokes happen when people eat many different kinds of diets, and nobody has said that eating a certain diet will be totally protective. In fact, one of the plant-based influencers, a giant in the field, Dr. McDougall, passed away relatively young. And so those kinds of ad hominems and saying, oh, look, this happened while someone was eating this way, doesn't mean that's necessarily the cause. Or if it was, is it different than, does it happen at any more frequent rate? Does it happen more commonly on one way of eating than another? We really won't know that until there are randomized trials of different diets going, prospective studies, which I think are really needed. We don't know the best type of diet for people, and I think we can match the diet to different metabolisms, and I think that's what we're watching these influencers do when they change what they're doing. And these are very high functioning gym rats, if you will. Dr. Saladino does surfing. I can't even learn how to get on a surfboard. So, the context of, if you're not a big exerciser, you're not doing those sorts of things, what they're doing may not apply to you. Interesting video again from Goji Man, and if you like, please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and look for new content on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.